All right, so welcome to my urban food forest garden. Yesterday I was thinking so much about you all being here with me, and I was thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to share with you all? And I got home and I pulled into my driveway and I looked and I saw this amazing chrysalis right here on this trellis that my dear friend helped me to build. And so I mentioned that to me, milkweed and monarch caterpillars have been a huge teacher and guide. They often show up in times of transformation for me, and it's definitely transformative to be creating this new website and sharing this information with you all. So the chrysalis was here, and it was one of those confirmations that helped me to feel like I'm on the right path. So as I mentioned before, this space was grass that was being mowed once a week, consuming a lot of energy. As we know, I grew up to the sound of leaf blowers, weed whackers. Even as we were setting up, I was like, oh man, I hope we don't hear that weed whacker in the background. Because constantly in the urban environment, we're mowing our lawns, we're getting rid of things, we're sending it off to the landfill, and we've somehow forgotten this rhythm. A lot of times when I share with people what I do, I find myself doing this hand gesture. So primarily what I'll be teaching you is about permaculture, and permaculture is a regenerative whole systems design philosophy where we're thinking of the whole system of life and trying to tap into those patterns and rhythms, because as we know, nature doesn't waste. Right now, the oak tree behind me is dropping its leaves, and so as the leaves fall down, when we visit my compost pile, you'll see that I then use the leaves to cover my food scraps and things like that. So yeah, welcome to the forest garden. Here, growing right here, kind of hard to miss, is a loofah. And so if you're familiar with a loofah sponge, loofahs are in the cercubit family, so they're related to like zucchini, cucumber, squash. And you can eat them while they're young, but I like to let them get real big and dry on the plant, and then you get a loofah sponge out of it. So it'll dry, you peel off the outside husk, slice it up, give it out to your friends and neighbors, use it in your sink, use it in your bathroom, it's wonderful. To the right here is blue butterfly pea, and another amazing dear friend right here, this is a little banana spider that I've just been watching grow, which is so cool, missing one of its hind little legs. But this is one of the gifts that you have when you invite nature into your home and into your space, is a place to observe patterns and to invite life in. Not just to benefit the pollinators, but also to benefit us, because when we get so caught up in the world of human things, we tend to forget all the other amazing things that are happening around us. So even in this little space, I have about 150 edible and medicinal plants, and useful plants to pollinators as well. And most of all, I want you to know that I didn't spend a lot of money to do this. So we'll learn more about soil building and how we took back the grass lawn to start building fertility and life here later on in the course. But for the most part, a lot of plants can grow easily from cuttings, from seeds. And so if you want to learn more about this and you want to do this in a way that is regenerative and also builds relationship with neighbors, this is possible. So when I first moved into this space, I started building soil by laying down mulch. And I want you to know you never have to buy mulch again, because there are tree trimmers all around your community chopping down trees, mulching them, chipping them back, and they actually have to pay to drop the perceived waste at the landfill. So when you create a relationship with tree trimmers, I pulled on my street yesterday, they were chopping down an oak tree over there, so excited to make that new relationship. When they're in your neighborhood and they have a good clean load of hardwood mulch, they can drop it at your home and you can start building fertility. So I was laying down mulch, and one of the first two plants that I planted was pigeon pea and moringa. And so this little plant down here is a pigeon pea that has cropped up from generations of pigeon peas since that time. But it's important to have pigeon pea on site because pigeon pea is a support species. So to have a food forest, we want to be as regenerative as possible, meaning that we are looking to the local waste stream and also providing an abundance on our own site. And so pigeon pea is a nitrogen fixer, which means that it's a living plant food. It has a symbiotic relationship with a soil bacteria that takes nitrogen from the air, stores it in its root nodes, and then you can use it to chop and drop back. So you chop the plant back, put it at the base of your fruit trees or other plants that need to be fed, and it's a living source of fertilizer on your site. So that's another expense cut right off. And also, pigeon peas are delicious. They produce this little pea pod that provides protein in your diet. Think of my boss in the past who would say that you're not growing food unless you're growing proteins, fats, and starches. So pigeon pea providing that protein and also providing a source of fertilizer. We're stacking functions. To the right of pigeon pea is a magnificent moringa tree. And so I planted this moringa from a seed. There's another moringa right here as well too, but this one really took to this place, and they can grow up to 10 to 20 feet in a year. You can chop them back and keep them low. But the reason I planted this plant is because moringa is known by many to be the tree of life. It's a very hot superfood right now that is very expensive in stores, but the amazing thing about moringa, when you get to know the plant, is that it gives so much. It's so abundant and so accessible as well, and so easy to grow in my environment. And so moringa provides all sorts of trace minerals and protein as well too, and it's just a really amazing food source. Just this morning I had it with my breakfast, and so moringa, we love to see it. Moving on through, this is a little herb bed, but this is the amazing thing about food forest systems, is that things can evolve and change. So last summer, it's presently winter, we're in our dry season, but last summer my sister's dog came to visit and Huck was jumping all around through here, and this is a bed of dune sunflowers. Killed all the dune sunflowers, but that's okay, because what I did was we have a dear friend visiting us who we should definitely speak about. So we were talking about the monarch butterfly, and here she is right now. We saw something pretty miraculous as we were setting up to film this video, which I've never seen before, where we think two butterflies were mating. But the process is that a female butterfly will come in and lay her eggs on this plant right here, the milkweed plant, which you can see has been being munched down. There was a caterpillar on here before, but the reason we plant these plants is to attract these creatures. So it's an interesting question of what really is a pest, because I planted this plant and my intention with it is to have it be eaten. But it's challenging sometimes. In my environment, one of the challenges are iguanas. Wondering what your challenge is, maybe deers if you're in the temperate climate, but they all teach us lessons. And the truth is there are really no pests in nature. Nature balances itself through this amazing rhythm and cycle. And so I love milkweed so much. This is our native milkweed. There's giant milkweeds as well too, and there's milkweeds that will grow in your climate. But back to this area, so all I did when the dune sunflower died back was mulch over it, and now I've planted a variety of delicious plants like mustard greens over there. This is a tropical spinach, which I grew from cuttings from the park that I work in, just taking one of these cuttings, sticking it in the ground. There's all sorts of varieties of plants that work well in your place. And so for me, we have all sorts of tropical spinaches is their street name. This is Ciso spinach is its other name. But a key to being successful as a grower is planting plants that want to grow well in your place. So right now, this time of year is known as growing season. But the truth is that growing season is kind of challenging here because it's very dry. So what they mean by growing season is it's when we're growing annuals. So I've grown a couple annuals. I've been eating tomatoes last week, which is wonderful, and I got mustard greens there. But this garden stays here year-round when I focus on the perennial plants, the plants that stick around or come back year after year, that keep the forest garden a forest. This is an awesome plant. It's also known as toilet paper plant. It's related to Cuban oregano over there, which is a tropical oregano species. This is our state wildflower, Coreopsis. Kunti, another host plant. And moving along the way back here, Every house I've ever lived in has, interestingly enough, had a jasmine vine in the front. I didn't plant this jasmine vine when I moved in. I didn't plant any of those jasmine vines. But when we start to notice patterns in our life and plants that are around us, we start to feel a little bit more at home and supported by living systems. An amazing story about this is that my aunt who lives next door, she has asthma. And very interestingly enough, this weed, known as asthma weed, grows pretty much just around her front door, which is pretty special. So I believe that plants will come into your life when you need that medicine at that time. So when we open ourselves up and allow those plants, sometimes weeds, to come into our space, we receive just what we need. So moving on back, we got a lot of bananas through here. Bananas are a home run, easy to grow plant here in the tropics. They grow really easily from pups or daughter plants, sister plants, keikis on the Big Island they knew them as. But essentially what will happen is you plant this little banana. I actually received this from a neighbor. So planted one banana in the food forest, and it'll start sending out these sister or daughter plants. And then one of the plants will produce a rack. The other day I was with a friend and she was like, "What's the secret? Why are you good at growing bananas?" And the secret is bananas love to be fed. But don't go to the store to buy fertilizer to feed your plants, to feed your banana plant. Instead, I use this as a chop and drop site. So as we know, especially in the tropical urban environment, there's no resting time. Things are growing all the time. So if I prune things back, I'll put them into the center of this banana circle. And that feeds the plants so that you have big racks. So essentially what will happen is the banana plant will grow up. Bananas actually aren't even a tree, they're a giant herb, like papaya as well too. They're very wet and fertile sources. You can actually, so it will produce this rack. You enjoy the rack. You can eat them as green bananas. You can also eat them as ripe bananas. You'll harvest the rack, and then you'll chop the banana plant back and feed it either back to the bananas to grow more bananas, or you can frame out garden beds with the bananas as well too. But this actual plant will not produce another rack, so in order to keep the cycle going, you'll chop it back when it's finished. And we actually got 2 racks coming in right here, which is pretty cool. 2 at the same time. So here's that flower that comes out. And you can use this for fermented plant juices as well too, to amend the soil and invite in healthy bacteria into your garden. So really the secret is anytime you're chopping things back in your garden, put them onto the bananas. And it's also a nice aesthetically pleasing way to put your waste products that also helps you to obtain a yield of delicious bananas. This is my nice little seating area over here. And we got a strong overstory here. When I moved into my site, I was like, man, those oak trees are big. Everything's really shady. But shade can be an asset. Sun can be an asset. When you move into your site, rather than seeing things as a challenge that needs to be blocked, instead, how can we use these resources to create the healthiest system possible? So I mentioned that the oak trees right now are dropping their leaves a lot. And so not only is this helping me to build soil, but it's also suppressing weeds and providing a nice little ground to walk upon. But I do have pretty constant shade here. The sun rises in the east. So plants that I planted in here are plants that like shade. So we got some wonderful medicinal plants like tilo and motherwort and ferns, which are so nice. There's always options for whatever space you've got. It's just learning to adapt to the place that you've been given and appreciate what you've got. To our right is another tropical spinach. This is chaya. We had a big storm move through. So our rainy season is in the summertime. We're presently in the dry season. Big storm moved through, knocked back a bunch of chaya plants, but it's okay because the root system was very established. I chopped it back and I actually distributed those cuttings to some friends, and there's still presently some cuttings in my little nursery as well too. So I've mentioned that this is a great way to grow through cuttings. So this little piece right here we could chop off, stick in the ground or stick in a pot, and have another chaya tree, which is pretty amazing. This is another tropical tree spinach, very nutrient dense, very delicious. And one of the best things about this plant too is, you know when you buy a bag of spinach and you're like, where did all that spinach go? You cook it, it turns into nothing. Chaya actually holds up its chewiness a lot more. It feels a lot more substantial, and it's year-round greens anytime that you want them. So we got another wonderful tropical green over here, easy to grow from cuttings. Actually has a bunch of little babies popping up right now because it had just gone to seed. This is katuk, a really delicious perennial green that isn't as bitter as other greens. It has more of a savory quality to it, which is really nice, and you can use it to form a living hedge. And then this is another great plant right here. This is Tithonia diversifolia, or Mexican sunflower. This is another living plant food. So pigeon pea provided the nitrogen that we needed, but a lot of times when we buy fertilizer at the store, it's NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so Mexican sunflower provides a lot more phosphorus and potassium. It's not a nitrogen fixer, but it provides those other qualities that you need. Right here is a datil pepper. A cool thing about growing peppers in the shade that I've learned is that they act as a perennial. So this plant I planted that first season when I was here, and it continues to produce and thrive here. A lot of times when we have them out in the sun, they'll just last as an annual for one season, but datil pepper, we love to see it doing great. This is a beautiful plant I just got from my friend. It's related to ginger. And another important part of our system, of course, is water. So we're deep in the dry season right now. Rain barrels living on a prayer. But I actually got this rain barrel from the side of the road. I was driving home one day, saw it on the side of the road, so remembering it doesn't have to be expensive to start this space. But thinking of those usual qualities that plants need to grow, like sunlight, healthy soil, and water, those are important things to look for when we're starting to build our system. And how can I harness the resources that are already around me to create a healthy system? So found the rain barrel. And then when we get a good rain, it fills up in probably about 5 or 10 minutes and starts to overflow. So I planted a water-loving plant right here, longevity spinach. Does fine with the flooding. So welcome to my little makeshift nursery I've set up on the side of my home. The sun rises in the east over there. So I chose this site because little seedlings and things like that don't want too much sun. It also keeps it manageable for me so I'm not having to water, it's not drying out all the time. And so this was just kind of a little swale on the side of my house. I set up a table right here, and something I love to do is, just yesterday I was planting seeds from going to a friend's house, eating the loquats off the tree, putting them in my pocket, and then I came home and I put them into little pots. Yesterday was a great day for planting based off of moon cycle patterns. If you want to learn more about that, let me know. The Farmer's Almanac has some great resources on that. But another way to ensure growing goes a little bit more smoothly is to run by these rhythms of the moon. It sounds a little strange and out there, but as we know, the moon controls the tides on our planet, so it controls moisture levels in the soil as well too, and it can really be an amazing ally in growing. Before we move forward, you probably hear a chainsaw in the distance. Here filming, we're trying to make it nice and pleasing to you, but the truth is we are in the urban environment. We're not in some sort of oasis. Well, it is somewhat of a little oasis that I've created for myself, but the trucks are going past, the chainsaw's going, the dog is barking in the distance, and that's the reality of the situation that I have. And that's the reality of the situation that a lot of us have. Not all of us want to move out to the country and have a bunch of acres of land. So to not have resistance to those sounds and to those noises and to allow them into the space and to still create a wonderful space for life is something that is definitely possible. So in the nursery, like I said, that chaya got knocked back, and so I stick the cuttings into pots, and you can see they're starting to send out new growth. And underneath is my little worm farm, which if you take the course online, you'll learn about vermicomposting. So if you live in a condo, which a lot of people do, there's a very strong condo culture even in my community as well too, you still can find ways to harness that waste and to obtain a yield. And one of those ways is through worm farms. So we'll talk more about that in the future, but love to show everybody the worms, love the worms so much. But my preferred way to compost is actually just the pile system in my backyard. But that's right outside my bedroom window right there, and it's so nice to wake up in the morning and see what's sprouted and what's grown. So yeah, this is my little compost pile. Another important part of having a regenerative system, we're all creating food waste all the time. I mentioned I live next door to my aunt and my grandma, and so they've also started composting with us. So that way we're building soil on site, we're building fertility on site. Thinking of compost is essentially like a probiotic for the soil. It's good bacteria that we're putting into the system to help create an even healthier and stronger system. We'll talk more about composting in the course too. So looking behind me, you're like, Megan, I thought you said you didn't like grass. Why is there so much grass behind you? But once again, we're using the space that we've got. So I live next door to my aunt and my grandma. They love grass. A lot of people really love grass. I'm very intrigued why everyone loves grass so much and how grass is such a powerful plant that has captivated people to want to listen to weed whackers all the time and put all of these fertilizers into our aquifer system. It's really an amazing plant. But if I had my way, we would have more plants back here. But the truth is I'm using the space that I've got. So using the edges, whatever space you've got that you're allowed to grow in, grow there. Think of my boss again, who would say, grow food everywhere. There's a strong mentality of wanderlust, travel. I'm not staying in this space for that long. I'm renting, but there's also an indigenous saying of plant for the next 7 generations. And so plant a tree in your space, or plant something that you can obtain a yield from in just 20 days, like a mustard green or a kale or collards or something like that. But there's always possibilities to get growing, so don't be discouraged by how long you think you're going to be in a space or the space that you've got too. Just use what you've got and enjoy it. So we are in front of my lang lang tree that I planted probably about 1.5 years ago, has grown quite substantially. Lang lang is a wonderful, beautiful smelling flower. So it doesn't always have to be food growing in your space. It can be things that bring you joy. And lang lang definitely brings me joy. The flowers smell more in the evening because they're pollinated by a night pollinating moth. But I just have this plant around because it's beautiful. It also provides a bit of a screen from the rest of the backyard. And along the line here, I've planted some different tropical fruit trees, just trying to use the space as best I can, like jackfruit, tamarind, canistel, jaboticaba. There's some Suriname cherry back there. And along the edges, we've got more bananas, noni, papaya. And a lot of these trees, actually the trees behind you right there, are trees that I got from local tree giveaways. So there's an avocado back there, a star fruit, lychee tree. All of these I got for free just by tapping into the local plant system. Our mangoes right now are just about to be sending out their blooms. Mango season's in the summer. A lot of times Florida gets a bad rep for the summertime. It's very hot, but mango season is definitely a gift here, and so is the nice, warm, calm water. And then behind us is another support species, ice cream bean. Produces a long bean pod that has like a cotton candy-like consistency, which is where it gets its name, but also a support species, so another living plant food, and amazing shade tree as well too. So we are presently in my carport on the west side of my home, but I don't park my car in here. Instead, I like to grow plants in here. So the west side gets a lot of sunlight, but it's also kind of blocked from the neighboring property. But what we got around us are pineapple plants. And so pineapple is a really easy to grow plant. If you look at it, it's essentially just a pineapple top that has grown large. So next time you go to the grocery store and eat a pineapple, you can slice off the top, take off those lower leaves, stick it into a pot or into the ground if you're here in the tropics. And within about 1 year to 1.5 years, you'll have a pineapple plant. So right now, during our cold season, when we get these cold fronts moving through, they'll start to send out little flowers from the center. And by summertime, that's when we will be enjoying pineapples. And behind me is a magnificent elderberry tree, shrub I would say. which I just grew from a cutting from a dormant plant. When I was working in Mississippi, I took a cutting from a friend's home and stuck it in the ground back here when I first moved in, and now it's really taken off, and I get berries each summer and each spring, and you can also use the flowers. It has a natural wild yeast on it that you can ferment to make like an elderflower champagne, which is really nice. And overall, this tree has just been an amazing guide and teacher for me in so many ways. Also provides a nice little screen from the neighboring property. Over here, I was moving these logs the other day. I felt so strong. So as you can hear the faint sound of chainsaws, things are constantly being cut down all the time. They were cutting down a coconut palm. So they gave me the heart of the palm, which was really an amazing gift to enjoy. And then we cut up the logs like this to frame out my little tomato bed. So growing season, they say, is during the winter here, but remember, we can grow year-round here in our place. But in the wintertime is actually when we're growing tomatoes here in Florida. And so we got a couple varieties right here. The ones I've been enjoying so much are these sun gold tomatoes right here. When they turn dark orange, that's when it's time to eat them. And then there's another kind of beefsteak variety right here, a couple coming in. And then along this edge is Everglades tomato. So this is another example of a plant that evolved in our place. So this is a sort of wild tomato, very small, but my grandma who lives next door, she's the best tomato she's ever had. They're so delicious, so wonderful, and they pop up year after year as well too. When they go to seed, they'll go dormant during the summertime, and then when the weather starts to cool down, they start popping up all over the place, usually in a very intelligent place where they can trellis themselves onto the fence and provide tomatoes for you or for your grandma. So all these papayas you see behind us came from one papaya, and that's an amazing thing about seeds and about plants. So harvesting a papaya, we had some big floods this year. My grandma's house, who I live next door to, she's lived in this house for 50 years, and it flooded 4 times last year. So things are changing on our planet, and one of my papaya trees fell down, and I scattered some seeds in this area, and I've actually thinned out a lot of papayas through here, bringing them to different food forests throughout the community. But the papayas that have remained are wonderful. They provide some shade from that western sunlight that comes in. But papaya is also an amazing, really easy to grow plant. Once you scatter the seeds in your side yard, they'll come up and they'll produce fruit in about 8 or 9 months. So really a home run, easy to grow plant. Another giant herb inside, this is actually hollow. And if you take off one of these leaves, you can see that the leaves are hollow as well too. So the smaller leaves, I have a friend who leads garden tours, and she actually turns these into little straws to drink cocktails with. But what I'll do with this, now that I've taken it off, and you know, is I'll put it on the bananas. Once we take off things that are dying, we put it back on other plants to have them grow. Other annuals through here, they've got some broccoli coming up, some green beans starting to climb the pole, some kale, a rogue eggplant that popped up out of nowhere, and another great support species back here. This is comfrey. So comfrey is a mineral accumulator, which means that it has a very deep taproot. So the deep taproot pulls up minerals from the ground, and then you can use these leaves, chop them back, and put them onto other plants, or you can also use them as a poultice. Another cool name for comfrey is the bone knitter, because if you whack your leg on something or your arm, you can wet the leaves, blend them up, and put it onto the wound, and it helps to alleviate that inflammation. Thank you all so much for being here on my Food Forest Garden tour. I hope that some of the things that I've shared with you feel accessible and relatable to you. Like I said, many of these plants were grown from cuttings, so it's learning what plants like to grow well in your place, and then sticking those cuttings into your garden so you can create a healthy system. What I've got behind me right here is one of the only edible trees that was on site, the only edible tree. We had monstera as well too, but that's like a little low-lying vine. But this orange tree was here, and it was not producing a yield at all, no oranges. But year after year, I have nurtured this plant by mulching around it, doing some chop and drop. There's a very mysterious thing in Florida. A lot of times people think of Florida Sunshine State orange juice, but because we monocropped our citrus, we planted a lot of citrus trees in one place, we created this superbug known as citrus greening that wiped out a lot of citrus about 10 years ago, and now still continues to affect a lot of our trees on site. And so there's an amazing thing that's been coming to be with citrus trees. This citrus just so happens to be now beneath an oak tree that the city had planted. And we're not sure why, but oak trees seem to have some sort of beneficial relationship with orange trees, in that either it's the tannins in the oak leaves that protects them from citrus greening, or maybe just the shade from the oak tree. But for the first time, when I got home a couple of weeks ago, it was covered in blooms that were then pollinated and are now tiny little oranges coming to be. So one of the gifts you can learn from being in relationship with plants is that even when all hope seems lost, love and patience in relationship and kindness helps us to nurture things back to life, both on the earth and in ourselves. And so, yeah, this space has been such an amazing place for me to learn and to grow and to heal. And my hope for all of you is that you will create one of these places in whatever space you've got to connect with living systems and to connect with yourself.